Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to break down the anatomy of literally the most famous killing in human history, the assassination of Julius Caesar. We're stepping back to the 15th of March, 44 BC, to a moment that absolutely shifted the axis of Western civilization. And to really grasp how this all went down, we need to drop ourselves right in the middle of that incredibly tense, cinematic environment.
So picture this. The setting itself is basically a trap. Caesar arrives not at the usual Roman Forum, which happens to be under renovation at the time, but at the Curia of Pompeii. It's this temporary gathering spot for the Roman Senate, tucked right at the eastern edge of a large open courtyard. Compared to the bustling main forum, this location is notably secluded. There's no direct access to the side streets of Rome, meaning the only way out is right back onto the portico. And loitering right near the entrance, trying and probably failing to look inconspicuous, is a large group of armed gladiators. Inside the Curia, you can just feel the air is thick with anxiety. Senators are nervously milling about as Julius Caesar, the undisputed dictator of Rome, takes his seat. And it's not just any seat, mind you. It's a golden ceremonial chair designed specifically for him. The visual here is just so striking. You have the most powerful man in the world, surrounded by his peers, yet dangerously isolated. His co-consul, the massive, fiercely loyal Mark Antony, is nowhere to be seen. He's been deliberately distracted outside. Caesar is completely alone, as a single senator rises from the benches and begins walking toward him.
Let's move to Section 1, the rise of a dictator, and look at exactly why the Senate feared Julius Caesar so much.
To understand the absolute dread that brought these senators to this very moment, we have to flash back just a bit to see how Caesar became the most powerful man in Rome. Over a nearly 40-year career, Caesar didn't just climb the political ladder, he totally dismantled it. He conquered modern-day France, Belgium, parts of Germany, completely establishing himself as a military genius. His legions were fiercely loyal to him alone, and his victories made him fabulously wealthy. But things really boiled over in 49 BC when he crossed the line, literally. Fearing his power, the Senate tried to strip his command. Caesar's response? He crossed the Rubicon River with his loyal soldiers, ignored Roman law, and triggered a massive civil war. By 45 BC, he defeated his chief rival, Pompey the Great. And then, by February of 44 BC, the Senate granted him an ultimate, unprecedented title, Dictator for life.
Now you have to realize that for the Roman Senate, the title Dictator for life sounded terrifyingly close to a word they absolutely despised, king. See, way before the Republic, Rome had been ruled by tyrannical, cruel monarchs. When they finally overthrew the last one, King Tarquin the Proud, back around 509 BC, the Roman people, and specifically the conservative aristocracy, made a sacred vow. They swore that no king should ever rule Rome again. The entire foundation of their government was built on preventing one man from holding absolute power.
The problem was, Julius Caesar was acting an awful lot like a king. He wasn't just centralizing power, he was frankly flaunting it. He started wearing opulent royal garments around town, he constructed public statues of himself, his allies even succeeded in changing his birth month, Quintilis, to Julius, which by the way is why we call it July today. And of course, there was that highly personalized golden chair, placed right smack in the Senate. To the conservative aristocracy, their monopoly on the government was vanishing right before their eyes.
Which brings us to Section 2, Plotting the Assassination, a conspiracy of 60 men.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing who exactly was involved. Since defeating Caesar on the battlefield was proven to be entirely impossible, his political foes realized they needed a completely different, much darker solution. But this conspiracy of 60 men wasn't just some unified monolith. Not at all. Some were Caesar's own former allies who simply felt they hadn't been rewarded enough for their loyalty. Others were remnants of the Pompeian faction, guys who had actually fought against Caesar in the Civil War, and whom Caesar had, perhaps a bit foolishly, pardoned. But the vast majority? They were conservative aristocrats. These were men who profited greatly from the republic structure and wanted to protect their monopoly on the Senate from Caesar's total centralization.
So these 60 men met in secret for months, and they brainstormed some truly wild, almost comical plans. They actually thought about attacking him on the public Via Sacra Street, but there were just too many of Caesar's intimidating friends around to intervene. They even considered, well, literally flinging him off a bridge to armed men waiting below. I mean, really. They even debated hiding assassins in plain sight, disguised as fighters at a gladiator show. But they quickly realized that every single one of these scenarios lacked one crucial element: control. They realized they needed the perfect trap, and the Senate floor provided exactly that. By choosing a closed Senate session, they guaranteed isolation. Weapons were strictly prohibited in the Senate House, meaning resistance from bystanders would be highly unlikely, and Caesar's informal bodyguards wouldn't be allowed inside. Plus, there were the optics to consider. Doing it in the Senate made it look like a formal, justified killing of a tyrant for the good of the Republic, rather than just some arbitrary massacre in the streets.
Section 3. Omens and ignored warnings. Let's look at the escalating signs of doom.
What makes this whole story so incredibly compelling is that Caesar walked into this trap despite an overwhelming, staggering volume of warnings. Now, Caesar wasn't known to be particularly superstitious by Roman standards, but the sheer amount of red flags before the Ides of March was impossible to ignore. The omens came rapid fire. A month prior, a fortune teller named Spurina warned him of great harm on the 15th of March, after she couldn't find a heart and then a liver in 2 separate animal sacrifices. The night before the meeting, doors and windows in his bedroom flew open on their own. The next morning, his wife Calpurnia begged him not to go, after dreaming their house collapsed and that she was holding his bloodied corpse. Even Caesar's own personal seers conducted rituals that yielded terrible omens. This actually convinced him for a moment to postpone the whole meeting.
And the tragic irony of all this? The historian Plutarch records that the very day before the assassination, a fellow senator asked Caesar what he thought was the best way to die. Caesar ominously replied, "A death which is unexpected." Just incredibly chilling.
So if he was warned so many times, why did he go? Well, enter Decimus Brutus. Decimus was a trusted ally, a guy named second in Caesar's own will. He went to Caesar's house that morning and went straight for Caesar's ego. He asked him, how would it look if the great Julius Caesar cowered at home merely on the grounds of superstition? Shamed by a man he entirely trusted, Caesar decided to attend. He even ignored a physical warning scroll literally handed to him by a man on the street right before he walked into the lion's den.
Section 4. The most famous killing. The climax in the Curia.
Which brings us right back to that tense climax in the Curia. The trap is officially sprung. Remember that strict rule against weapons in the Senate? The conspirators completely bypassed it by secretly smuggling daggers inside wooden boxes normally used for carrying writing tablets. The whole sequence happens in an absolute flash. Outside, the Senator Trebonius pulls the brawny Mark Antony aside to keep him entirely out of the picture. Inside, Senator Tullius Cimber approaches the golden chair, loudly begging for a pardon for his brother. Dozens of other senators rise and start closing in, literally circling Caesar like sharks. Cimber suddenly thrusts out his fist and aggressively tears Caesar's toga down to reveal his tunic. Caesar recoils, shouts, and in that split second, Publius Casca strikes the very first dagger blow from behind, grazing Caesar's shoulder. But Caesar doesn't just surrender. He rises in shock, twirls around, and allegedly fights back, desperately stabbing Casca with his writing pen, a pen against a sword. But within seconds, he is completely enveloped by a suffocating shroud of togas and collapses under a relentless hail of daggers. In the frenzy, Marcus Brutus, a leading conspirator and former Pompeian, delivers a truly humiliating, agonizing blow, stabbing Caesar directly in the groin.
23. That is the number of stab wounds inflicted upon Julius Caesar by the frenzied mob of assassins. It was an overwhelmingly brutal, chaotic end to the most powerful man on earth.
And in a moment of profound, almost poetic thematic irony, the dictator bleeds to death right at the base of a statue of his former rival, Pompey the Great. After the Civil War, a lot of leaders would have destroyed every single trace of Pompey, but Caesar, as a show of grace, had mercifully refused to tear this specific statue down. Now that same statue stared down at him mockingly as he took his final breath.
Finally, Section 5, the fall of the Republic, and the massive unintended consequences of this act.
See, the story definitely doesn't end with the blood on the Senate floor. The conspirators honestly thought they were cutting off the head of a tyrant to save the Republic. Instead, they plunged it completely into darkness. The assassination instantly created a massive, highly unstable power vacuum. Caesar's adoptive son Octavian, alongside Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, formed a ruthless alliance. And they certainly didn't restore the Republic. Instead, they systematically hunted down every single man involved in the murder, crushing absolutely anyone who opposed them. The assassins' dream entirely backfired. Their actions directly caused the ultimate fall of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire, a full-blown hereditary monarchy. So, The crucial point here becomes incredibly clear when we compare these two leaders side by side. Look at Julius Caesar. He pardoned his enemies, promoted them, kept his rival statues intact, and openly flaunted his absolute power. He was a man people hated, but perhaps didn't fear enough. Now look at his adopted son, Emperor Octavian. He learned from his father's fatal mistakes. Octavian didn't offer mercy, he hunted down the opposition with absolutely ruthless efficiency, ensuring nobody was left alive to form a conspiracy against him in the first place.
And this brilliantly illustrates a core political lesson of the ancient world, summed up perfectly by historian John Balsden. He notes that if authoritarianism is going to replace a republic, it cannot be careless, inconsiderate, and frankly, authoritarian like Caesar's was. It must wear a republican mask, however false. Caesar's fatal flaw was walking around looking and acting exactly like the dictator he was.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Look at the facts we've gone through today. Caesar pardoned his enemies, and those exact same enemies stabbed him 23 times at the foot of a statue he graciously left standing. Did Julius Caesar's own mercy ultimately kill him? And when looking at the ruthless success of Octavian who followed him, is a mask of the old ways the true secret to maintaining absolute power? It's a deeply chilling historical question to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning history.